We've got Greg Sheridan joins me now. Greg, thanks so much for your time. Let's start with your thoughts on what the government's doing in relation to PNG. Is it enough? And is it the right thing to do?
It's certainly the right thing to do. It's absolutely the right thing to do. It's a beginning. I don't know if it's enough. We'll have to see. It's certainly also smart to vaccinate first the health system workers. But the broader policy problem of the Melanesian world and its long simmering crisis is a very big one for Australia, and it's one we've never really come to grips with. Papua New Guinea is a country of 10 million people, one of the poorest countries in the world, terrible health indicators, terrible socially transmitted disease indicators. We haven't really faced up to how much of a problem the Melanesian world can be for us. I mean, the Morrison government has done better than previous governments. It's another sign, really, that the resources we bring to defence and regional aid issues and so on are just not really commensurate with the challenge. But this is certainly a very good beginning, and the language of the PM was good, and it's right to put it in the Quad context because we want that to be a significant characteristic of our, diplomacy going forward.
Greg, just in further to what you're saying there, I mean, you're in Melbourne. It's often ranked the most livable city in the world. Port Moresby often ranked the least livable city, along with, Kabul and cities like that. So if you ever need sort of a stark reminder of how close we are in geographic terms, but how far we are in living standard terms, that ranking every year, I see it, and it's quite jarring because it's so close to Australia, PNG, at certain points within 4 or 5 Ks.
Well, you're absolutely right, Kieran. I mean, we benefit in this country from the fact that Papuans don't generally leave their homelands to try and live somewhere else. But I don't know if you remember, Kieran, 10 or 15 years ago, we had a couple of dozen refugees from West Papua, the Indonesian part of Papua, and it absolutely convulsed this nation and convulsed our relations with Indonesia. What were we going to do? Were we going to accept them? Were we going to send them back? Well, the fact that Melanesians generally have not fled their homeland doesn't mean that they never will in the future. There are all kinds of Australian national interests involved in Papua New Guinea not failing. Not that it's exactly on the brink of becoming a failed state or anything right now, but just imagine if a couple of 100,000 people from Papua New Guinea decided that actually their chances of survival would be much better in northern Australia than in Papua New Guinea. No sign that that's going to happen. But if that happened, we would be in desperate national crisis in a minute. So if there are things we can do which, help shore up Papua New Guinea and its government and its society, we ought to be doing them. It's not as if the Australian government has done nothing for Papua New Guinea in the past, but, it's not as if either our efforts have been a tremendous success there. It ought to be a bigger focus of our national effort.
Let's turn our attention back to the US relationship. John Kerry, the US presidential envoy on climate, spoke to the Prime Minister this morning. Andrew Clennell has reported that there is, his information is there is serious work and modelling going on within government agencies. DepSec, as Deputy Secretary of one of the departments, given the task of finding a way to meet net zero by 2050. So it's happening, and certainly with the support, if not pressure, from Washington, Greg.
Yeah, well, I think it is naked pressure, Kieran. We desperately need the Americans geostrategically, and we're going to have to probably go along with this insane zero emissions by 2050 target. The reason I say it's insane, John Kerry is Joe Biden's worst appointment. John Kerry was a terrible Secretary of State who basically traded away the South China Sea to the Chinese in exchange for a Kumbaya moment on climate. Now, he'll get another Kumbaya moment from the Chinese on climate, which will be utterly meaningless. The Chinese have committed to zero emissions by 2060. Meanwhile, simultaneously, they have the biggest coal-fired power station construction program of any nation in the world. They are responsible for nearly 30% of global emissions and responsible virtually for all the increase in global emissions over the last 10 years. Australia has a better reduction record than the OECD average, notwithstanding our high population growth and the singular nature of our economy. Now, if we go to a zero emissions by 2050 target, we won't meet it because it's impossible to meet, but we will bugger our economy on the way. The government's preferred formulation of let's get there as soon as we can through technology, not taxes, that's a very good formulation, and we've got a good record on that basis. But, you know, the Biden administration is developing as one that has good parts for Australia and bad parts. But this sort of climate politics symbolism, which is all this is, nobody is going to meet these zero by 2050 targets. This is pure symbolism. This is potentially very destructive. And all the societies we compete with geostrategically, China, Russia, Iran for that matter, they're not going to impose any of these costs on themselves, nor are the societies that we like in Asia, Indonesia, India and so on. They all have massive coal-fired power station construction programs. This is just the Europeans and the Biden administration imposing massive costs on the developed world for very, very little benefit.
Finally, Greg, the UK turning towards Asia. What's happening there? Is it a little of history repeating? What's going on this front?
Well, this is a good move, and it's an early dividend of Brexit. So the European Union is also threatening to impose the most outrageous climate tariffs on Australia, which shows just what an enemy of Australia the EU really is, how unreasonable it is. It's just had an investment agreement with China producing 30% of global emissions, and it's going to impose punitive climate tariffs on Australia, which has reduced its emissions massively. Britain will not be part of those tariffs because it is now free of the European Union. It's outside of the EU because of Brexit. Now, economic growth in Asia is much faster than it is in Europe, partly because Asia doesn't impose on itself the ridiculous regulatory burden that the EU imposes on itself. So Britain wants to hook into the high economic growth rates of Asia and move further away from the low, stagnant economic growth rates of Europe. At the same time, Britain is probably Australia's, most like-minded ally after the Americans in the world, and it is also willing to make a positive contribution in security in our region. It'll be pretty marginal given where Britain is located, but it's very good that Britain is also standing up to China on issues of principle, human rights in Xinjiang, the suppression of democracy in Hong Kong and so on. So Britain getting more involved in Asia, and Britain is the only European power which is really a global nation. That's good news for Australia, and that has been an object of Australian policy, and it's an early dividend from Brexit.
Okay, Greg Sheridan, thanks so much. Appreciate your
Thank you, Kieran.
time and insights as always. Thanks so much for that.